Hey Bhaskar,
Hi, how are you, Kasim?
I am good. How are you?
I'm good.
Do you need a couple of minutes?
No, going through the variances in life as can be. Last minute things always something or the other happens, but no worries. As long as
Awesome.
you guys are okay with me moving around a little bit while I wait for my nanny to arrive, famously 5 minutes late.
No problem at all. So, how's your day going so far? I think you just started, right?
My day is going so well so far. I woke up to my auto YouTube playlist playing the latest drama in Pakistan cricket with New
News.
Zealand. Yeah. So
Exactly. So Bhaskar, this is going to be more like our conversation last time. Super candid, super casual. We'll go over some of the things like you shared with the remote-based team internally, but this one will be watched by a bigger audience, primarily software engineers. So would love to hear your journey once more because that was like super super inspiring, and then we'll throw you a bunch of questions that people ask.
of course,
Awesome. So let's start. Like, you spent what 13, 14 years at Google and now you're at Facebook. How did you get to Google? Then why did you decide to switch? So like a brief 3, 4 minutes of your journey, of your story, especially for those that want to work for Facebook and Google, because spending like 13 or 14 years at Google is a long, long time, right?
uh, yes. So I think my career choices are a lesson in history in that every time there's a big crisis going on, I tend to make a big change. I don't know if that's a cause or if that's correlation, but right from the I guess there were three really important moments in leading to my career choices. One is me going to college to study computer science.
Mhm.
I was lucky enough to get into a good college. I had prepared hard, but still, there's a lot of luck. The second one was to go to Germany to to study for what I thought would be a year for what became 5 years, and then by pure luck, end up picking an area which was then called machine learning. And then finally, my professor leaving to go and join Google in 2000. He joined in 2006, and I joined him later in 2008. So I never thought this would become 14 years. I was actually looking back to come back to academia. I was going to be a professor, hopefully in Germany. And but no, I got to Google. I really really enjoyed everything. It just felt like a completely different world. It felt like things worked. It felt like everybody was extremely competent, very very well trained, and it's just amazing. In fact, working in a place like Google and like Facebook, you get what's called the imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
You work with people and you realize, oh my god, these people are all so good. They must have made a mistake hiring me. So at Google, that lasted quite some time. At
Yeah.
Facebook, I'm more comfortable. I've been here for a while, but yeah, that's kind of the arc so far.
No, so sorry for cutting you, but the first time you applied to Google, you didn't get in the first time, right?
Exactly. Yes. So I applied in 2006. My professor had just gotten there. I had never really written non-academic code before, so they went and asked me to write code on a whiteboard, and I did. And then somebody said, "Oh, how will you test this?" And I looked at them like, "What does that mean?" You mean like a unit test? Uh, and I had only read what unit tests were. I had never actually written one. So I kind of floundered, but then I truthfully said, "Look, I've never written a unit test. Here are the cases that I think I would test." So that was kind of a flag. They said, "Okay, I hadn't finished my PhD also at that time." So they said, "Why don't you come back in a few months and we'll do the rest of your interviews." So I came back in 2007, and I only did uh, two interviews, and that was really, really good. Actually, give me 10 seconds.
Yeah, yeah.
I have
Yeah, take your time. Hamza, why don't you join? I think your voice is also cutting out. Technical hiccup, guys.
All right, now I can be regular.
Oh, did the nanny
Yes,
arrive?
yes. Indian Standard Time. I don't know if there's a concept like Pakistan Standard Time, but Indian Standard Time definitely exists. So 12 minutes.
Yeah, yeah. No, 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 no worries. Awesome. So yeah, you were telling us the first time, you didn't know what unit tests were, then you applied again, and then you got in.
Then I got in, and I had also mostly done academic development before, maybe 2000 lines of code at a time. And when I got into Google, my first thing to was I was working in Gmail, and they said, "Well, write this C++ library that works with this server that you would have to create that works with a Python server at the other end that you'll need to modify, and you should test all of these."
Yeah.
And I'm like, बेटा एक महीना भी नहीं बचूंगा यहाँ पे. I'm not going to last a month. So it was thankfully it was not that difficult,
Mm.
but it was a huge learning experience. I think I learned more about programming in that first 6 weeks than I had in my life before that.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure, that's the case. Plus, i- are people as smart at Google as others think they are? Because everybody thinks like if you're at Google, you're like the smartest person that could possibly exist, right?
I Smartness is very hard to first measure. I think purely in IQ, Google famously tried to hire people with very high IQ. I think that part is true.
Hmm.
Over time, it's clear that Google optimized for IQ and not EQ.
Hmm.
So there were a lot of people. Often they would hire an expert in the area, right? So if they were looking for a compilers person, they would go and look at somebody who had been in the C++ standards committee, right? And then would interview them. So they would look for both knowledge as well as the ability to do things with your own hands.
Hmm.
And they'd created enough of an environment that people with advanced degrees were keen to come and work. So yeah, I think they got very smart people. That I have generally little doubt about.
Hmm.
Uh, Particularly in areas like machine learning, they went after every single PhD in the last, I won't say 10 years in machine learning, and found a way to interview them, made great offers. Many of them joined. People are definitely smart, but I don't think that is the interview is particularly testing for that. They're looking for, can you do things with your own hands? Some of the smartest people I knew there didn't actually have a college degree.
Oh.
So that was also there were quite a few people who got into college, dropped out a year, and then did their own thing for 4 or 5 years. There's actually a very nice book. I have it here, called
Hmm.
Androids. Just came out maybe a month ago, and it's about the initial set of people who uh, created the Android OS. And
Hmm.
they talk about every person who joined the team and their characteristics. You'll find that half of them did not have
Hmm.
a formal degree. In fact, many of them would not have made the formal Google interview process.
Hmm.
So they created a new process for folks coming to Android. And as you can see, these people were hugely successful, hugely academic, hugely impactful. So much for hiring only smart people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
एंड्रॉइड तो एक्विजिशन नहीं हुई थी गूगल की और वाज.
हाँ, एक्विजिशन हुई थी, उसमें से 20 एक लोग थे ना एक्विजिशन में, तो टीम तो बाद में 7-8 हजार लोग हुए,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
from 20 to the first 200 people, I think it was about 200 people who shipped the first version of software on this 2008 phone that they had, right?
Hmm.
So they had to hire a lot of people, right? They had to
And
hire a lot of people.
so I know we've discussed this in our previous talk as well, but how did they hire so many people and so quickly? Number one, and almost on the same lines, what attracts people to Google? I know Google is Google, but why is it Google? Is it because के दुनिया का सबसे बड़ा search engine है? Is it because के एक aura create हो चुकी है where people are like, if that's the dream job, or what is it that people attracts people to Google? And then how do you scale so fast while keeping talent, top notch,
Mm.
top 1%, top 0.5% or something?
So I think they did three things very well. One, they reached out to a large number of people, right? So they had a pretty large sourcing team and recruiting team that were just looking for people all the time. And one of the things that they would do is whenever somebody new would join the company, they would ask them to, give us the name of 20 people that you really like. And then they would go after them. So there was this people crawling type of approach, like, hey, we just got somebody really great. Let's crawl. Let's go and find out other people. So what this did was, because the initial set of people were very good, their network was very strong. So I would say in the beginning, maybe 50% of the employees were from Stanford because the entire network was from Stanford, and then it started to expand. So that's one part, which is they really depended on sourcing. The second thing was they asked people to spend a lot of time interviewing. 30% of an employee's time in the first 2 years was spent on interviewing others.
All of the employees, all the engineers.
Right. So that's actually, I mean, just think about that, right? When you're interviewing so much, right?
Yeah.
So you're interviewing 5 to 10 interviews a week, right? So you can obviously, and then everybody is doing it. You can actually go through a lot of people very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And the third thing is when they found the interviews were never easy, but when they found somebody who passed the interview, they would not stop at anything to get that person, right? So Google really raised the bar on, okay, we have found, because आज से 15 साल पहले ये था कि an A developer and an A plus developer, the difference between comp for them was maybe 5%, maybe 10%.
Mm.
And between an A plus developer and B developer was like 15% maybe.
Yeah.
The developers were very much like
Same.
TV repairman, right? There's no there's no difference. Google really took these and said, for the A plus, we're willing to pay you almost double.
Mm.
And that motivated people. And we found that often the A plus people could come in and do what maybe 100 other people would have done. So that productivity curve for somebody who is very good, very hands-on, is not linear. It is super linear. So as
Mm.
they did that, they started to create a chain of like, hey, if you're really, really good, A, only then will you get an offer. And two, if you get it, they are better than other paymasters. And so Google was very generous for the employees. I still remember this 2010 watershed moment where they realized there were a lot of options. I think Facebook and Twitter was starting to hire a lot of people. They raised the comp for everyone by 10% flat.
Mm.
Everyone. And by doing that, and in some cases even more, they went above the industry by 10%.
Yeah.
Right? And so it very clearly created a brand moment. Okay, Google is where if you get in, you get paid more. 10% was only what it felt like, but for people to think, oh, Google is a good paymaster, and now they publicly made this even higher. I think it was really amazing.
Yeah.
I think they have really been the first employer that realized the importance of engineers.
Mm.
And to the other point, which is why people stayed that long, engineers were in every role. Product managers were engineers, program managers were engineers, most all the managers were engineers,
Mm.
VPs were engineers, salespeople had to have an engineering background. Like everybody had like a very engineering on culture. And so, in fact, to be a programmer, you didn't need to have a computer science degree, but
Mm.
for other areas, you needed to. If you were a product manager without a BS in computer science, you wouldn't get in. They would actually, right? So they really made an engineering first investment very, very significantly. I think that was huge.
Amazing. And I, an interesting thing that we did at Remote Base as well, we took this leaf off from you, and we've like started paying 40% above market at remote
Oh,
basis.
wow.
Yeah. So we take, Pakistani software engineers, and we try to
That's
find
awesome.
like the 10x engineers, right?
Yeah.
We try to find them, and we pay them up to 40% above market, just so that there there's this political statement in Pakistan, roti kapda makan. So what I say is that all three of them will be taken care of, so that you can just focus on work.
And I think that security that somebody gets is the safety part, right? When somebody takes really good care of you and you know you are capable, that's when I think people do their best work.
Exactly.
Right.
So on that line, like, what advice would you have for somebody that firstly wants to be a 10x engineer, and then what two, three things you think are important for a software engineer, and then obviously if they want to get into Google or Facebook.
I I think the number one thing is curiosity. You have to be extremely curious about how things work. And if you look at the history of really, really good engineers, they all started relatively young by tinkering with things. Like, it's like, oh, you have a I mean, now nobody uses a calculator, but, 20, 25 years ago, everybody used a calculator. If you take that apart and figure out how it works, right? Have curiosity about how are they computing things like sin x and cos x, because there's like how that there's no chip there, right? There's doing computations, right? So have curiosity about how does each and everything that you take for granted work. uh, and when you start from very simple things, you'll realize that taking that to something different is very, very hard, right? So I was doing this the other day. I'll share this. I will not put in all the details, but I was going to a page repeatedly that had some payment block, and I could clearly see the payment block that they're doing is they're only putting, a banner on the front so that you can't read it. Like, okay, so I would go into the source with Chrome. Then you're figuring out, oh, they're calling this JavaScript. This is the diff that they're calling, etc. You go and change it. Boom, gone, right?
Yeah.
Right. So getting to that step primarily because you have curiosity, like how are they doing it, how is it becoming possible, right? So I think if there is curiosity towards everything that you do not initially understand, one, over time you just get used to thinking about, okay, I have to figure out how things work. And secondly, you've developed the confidence, and all 10x engineers have that. They're just fearless. They're
Mm.
fearless about put any complex system in front of them. They're not thinking, "Ye mujhse nahi hoga, this is too hard." They're
Yeah.
like, okay, let me go and get electrocuted here, let me go and stop this server, let me see how things crash. Oh my god, I did something bad, like can I undo it, right? So that is I think what differentiates. It's not knowledge, because knowledge is what you gain here by doing things in a slightly with like engaging in your curiosity.
Mm.
So I found that fascinating. मैंने जेफ डीन के साथ थोड़ा काम किया है, मैंने और लोगों के साथ काम किया है. The kind of questions that they ask to get to anything is not verifying what they know. It is verifying what they do not know.
Mm.
So I found that to be incredible. And once you're doing something like that, you can often go into the level of detail that other engineers cannot.
Mm.
Right? A good JavaScript engineer, developer will write, maybe reuse somebody else's code. A great developer will go and figure out what library we are using, what APIs we are using, and modify them, right? For if that are specific for your purpose, make them smaller, make them more compact, right? And it's not about using the most. That's the other fallacy. Great engineers aren't using the latest stuff. They use stuff that they know really, really, really well and have figured out how to work. There was actually a very funny story about an engineer that I knew who was fantastic at Perl, did
Mm.
everything with Perl. So much so when we asked him to write code in C++, he took Perl to generate C++ code. The code worked, but he was like, I know provably because I know this works in Perl and I'm just doing to a line by line translation. It's going to work. Uh, but I mean, that's not a good example, by the way. I wouldn't recommend people doing that, but it's kind of what is a sign of people who are really good at their craft.
Hmm. But doesn't that go slightly against the belief कि जी technology बहुत तेजी से change हो रही है तो अब React आया है, everybody is doing React, but React didn't exist I think before 2016. तो वो people that are really good at one, let's say on PHP for example, तो वो die out हो जाता है. तो it's very important to also keep switching your tech stack to whatever is latest, right? Or would you disagree?
I think it's the way I would think about this is, does something new help you improve on top of what you can do with technology that you already know, right? So I never use React myself. What I know is if I have to, I can, and I can figure it out. I know very, very few people who do. But what will often come up is, if you're doing things in a certain way, and for example, when you compare, if you've written an app, right, or if you've written a web page, and it's not as snappy, as fast as something that you've experienced, then you ask, why is there a difference between the two? And if you find the differences because of a specific technology, then you go and switch, right? I saw this with the C++ and Java, right? So, 20 years ago, Java was beginning to get everywhere, but there was still a significant difference in performance, right? The reason something like Java became really, really powerful is, they were coming up with many, many more engineers who knew Java, and two, the platform agnostic part really meant that you wouldn't have to worry if this person could write code for only backend software, only front end software, or only mainframe software, whatever. You could basically assume that this would work everywhere. Whereas with very specific technologies, that wouldn't quite work. So I believe the people who have used something very fundamental for 20 years often go further in their career than folks who get attached to the latest technology.
Hmm.
That's my belief. Uh, but often what happens is people don't stay as an engineer for very long, right? 5 to 10 years is when people code, and then they move on. Either they get into management, or they basically start coordinating with other people as opposed to doing things on their own. So you will often see that somebody's career really moved very fast in the beginning because they were very good with the latest technology. But if you look at an engineer who does something great over 20 years, you'll find that they're not changing their tools very, very much.
Hmm.
Jeff
So
Dean still does C++ only. Jeff Dean does C++ 25 years ago, still today does C++ only. He is one of the best engineers that I've seen in my life.
hmm. True. So talking about going into management roles, like पहले 5 साल आप you learn something, आपका learning curve भी बड़ा steep होता है. You learn something, then you get into management. So first question is, what according to you makes a good manager? Who do you think make what traits make a good manager?
मेरी philosophy, especially management के बारे में ये है कि you need both a combination of uh, selflessness,
Hmm.
and uh, you need to care for other people. Being a
I
manager is
would
like
love
being a
to hear your story as well of how you turned into a manager and the problems you faced initially.
Yes, I'm trying to remember now. So I had come into Google 2008, and I think it was about first couple of years I had really done well as an engineer and had started a bunch of projects. Things were going well. I had hired a lot of people who were all reporting to my manager, and it got to a point where my manager had 28 reports and was not does not have time for anyone.
Hmm.
Not impossible, right? And from their perspective, they're like, this team is doing great, why should I get involved? And a bunch of junior engineers would come to me and like, hey, I have this question and that question, and I'm really struggling with X, and like my manager doesn't have any time. So I started working with them a little bit. uh, Then got to a point where my director, who had actually been my professor in my PhD program, came to me and says, "Bhaskar, I think you should become a manager." I'm like, "Absolutely not." Like I have like look at what this guy does and look at what I do. Like I'm in the front. I'm like on the front lines in everything. You want me to be that guy? Like I'd commit suicide. Like, uh, so I said okay. And then 2 months later, he came back again. Bhaskar, I think the team really needs. I'm like, no, 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 no. And then finally, something happened. I don't remember exactly what happened. Uh, Two of my people were quitting. They
Mm,
were like, this team has no management support. We are not like about to, we cannot do anything. Nobody is, they're not hiring managers. You are not willing to become a manager. We can't do this. So then I went to my director and said, oh, my manager is doing a horrible job. You should do something. Tell me if you want me to do something. He's like, okay, we've been asking you for 3 months, 4 months, but now you think, okay, good. So I think within 2 days, I became a manager and I had three or four people initially, including I think Ihar was one of those folks that you have worked with. Ihar, I was probably Ihar's first manager. I mean, when I first became manager, I think I was Ihar's manager as well.
mm,
And I was still a very hands-on manager, which is a which is a politically correct way of saying that I still competed a lot with my engineers. So I'd be like, oh, इनको कुछ काम दिया है, मैं भी करूँगा. And and it would go to my head that I could do things better than my engineers. Also, not necessarily a good idea as a manager, but
mm,
I was pretty bad in my first year as a manager, but simply because I did not think of my role as an accelerant to other people.
mm,
So then I think came a point where I think I'd share this with quite a few folks in your team, right? So my son fell quite sick, and I had to move him from Switzerland, where I was living, to the US. And for the like just dealing with the fact that he was going through a very hard time. He was very young. He was 14 months old. He had cancer. And I just didn't know how to deal with it. And I didn't know how to deal with myself. And my team really gave me so I was transitioning the team from being a team here in Switzerland to the US. So many people were moving. And my team came to me and said, Bhaskar, don't worry, we'll take care of it. And they would only come to me when they needed it, and things kept going on. And I think I was out for about mentally, I was out for at least 6 months. Physically, maybe I was out for like a month at a time. But every time I would check in, I would be like, things are going okay. Things are going well. And from the early reactions of, they can do this without me, to, oh my God, thank God they can do this without me. And that's when I realized that I didn't need to do what I was doing as a manager uh, to be that hands on. I could depend on other people. And so
mm.
that transition was really very, very important one. And I feel like anybody who becomes a manager that other people want to work with has gone through this sort of humbling cycle. Like
Yeah.
कहीं ना कहीं जाके realize होता है कि उनकी टीम को actually उनकी जरूरत नहीं है, and they are better, as this coach rather than playing captain,
Mm,
right? So going from this, this Imran Khan kind of model that you're the captain of the team and you're the one of the best players and you're the coach, to somebody who is more, egoless, sitting on the side, strategizing with the team and letting the team be the player on the ground. I think that's the need of today.
mm.
After 20 साल पहले, that was not the case. People who were playing captains were recognized much more. But today, I feel like the style, especially with large scale. So in a
Mhm.
way, I mean, although this entire thing was very hard to go through, uh, it made me realize that I actually was probably meant to be a manager at some point.
Yeah, that's a beautiful, the way the team helped you and all of that, and that also, makes me think, at the end of the day, you might be the smartest people working at Google, but there's a a lot of human element to things, right? People come together as humans, and as a manager, how do you handle that? Because having a human element also means that everybody is going through a different period in their life. Somebody's having, personal problems, like you had those problems. Somebody might have, you know a divorce or something or the other. How do you manage all of that as a manager? Because everybody's so different and everybody's going through such a different roller coaster of their own lives, and you need to bring them all together on the same page. And you can't like have rules for everything, right? You can't say you can take only 4 days off in a year when somebody's, son or daughter is unwell. You can't say you can take 2 days off because while someone's getting married. So how do you like bring all of your team together in those situations?
Yeah, a wise person once told me, and I believe this. Uh, everybody that you work with is going through their biggest crisis that you just don't know about, right? So everybody at some point in time has a huge challenge, something that they're struggling with, and if they're lucky, it does not impact life. But it is something that is very, very, uh, very challenging, and especially during the pandemic. To your point, I don't know how many of my friends, how many of the people I worked with have suffered both personally and have seen somebody very close suffer, right?
Mm,
So there is a lot of stuff that always happens, and the way that I think about that as a manager is assume that's going to be the case and make it okay to deal with whatever is happening in your life as your first priority. So of course, when the team is small and everybody matters and every single person you're trying to needs to pull their weight, you still have to keep in mind that people will not often like this, these things will come and go.
mm,
But the best way to keep your team together is whenever something like this happens, in my opinion, is to be transparent. Tell for people that this is the hard stuff that they're going through, and we have to, as a team, support them. uh, if as a manager you do it, it can be incredibly powerful, because that's what creates a stronger bond with the team. Like I remember last year, there's somebody in my team who got COVID,
mm,
and they were alone. They were alone in the Bay Area, and the moment they got COVID, all their roommates ran away. Right? They were like, right? Because these were people who were kind of living together, and then they didn't stick around to take care of them. So this person was all alone, not knowing what to do. So he called his manager, and this person was a indirect report for me. And I said, "Yeah, ये तो बहुत ही गड़बड़ काम है. I mean, like, how is this person going to do it? They're so far away from home." So we developed a routine of calling that person alternate days and basically arranged food for that person. We were still afraid of going and visiting, but then the person, at least a couple of people would go once a week, stay far, from the window or whatnot, and talk to them. It took that person 4 weeks to recover,
mm,
right? But I have to say that that bond that that person felt with their team, they were the saddest when I was leaving Google. They were like, "How can you leave me? How are you leaving?" Right? Because for them, this had become more than a team; it had become a family. And I think that's basically, going back to your original question, that's my way of being a manager, which is to make this a family, right? And my role is to be sort of the lead of the family, head of the family, right? And so all the people who work with me, I take care of them, I support them just like I support my kids. And their needs are important. They're not always going to be rational. You have to tell them no every now and then. Uh, but they have to realize that you are there to take care of them and to grow them, and you
mm,
will take care of their needs, and so they can come to you. They will not always be rational, right? So since I took this mindset of I'm like a parent for all of them, right? And if I'm lucky, they will all grow to be significantly stronger, in all dimensions than me, right? Just like a parent hopes, right? You want your kids to be better than you, right? You want them to be not to go through the same issues, not to go through the same problems, but just have more achievement in life in whatever dimension they care about. So having that mindset, I have really found has changed the way my team reacts to me. Because that's what I
Okay.
tell them, right? My role here is to be like your parent, which means that all the things that you expect from your parent, you will get from me. When you're doing well, I will tell you, and I will be super happy, and I'll go everywhere and say, how great this person is doing. When you're not, I will come and tell you, you're not doing this right. Don't do it. And I will come and tell you proactively. But one thing is for sure, I will always want you to do better than me. That's what I'm hoping, that as you grow, you will grow to do better than me. I found that that resonates with people. That's what a lot of people want.
Yeah, and I think especially being there for people and helping them grow without competing with them, like you said in the beginning, I think that matters a lot. Where you're more, I think, selfless and giving in that sense, and you live through the other person. Their success is your success. If somebody, let's say, even leaves, would have left Google and ended up doing their startup and super successful, you'd be happy, right? So
Yeah, very, and to me, that parenting model actually means that I'm in touch with a lot of people over years, right? I mean, Iharu is my friend,
yeah.
and I was his first manager, but God, he stopped working with me in 2011 or 12. I was his manager only for 2 years,
Hmm.
but I meet him as much as I can, right? I've advised, many people, including him, through his job changes. They come to me with problems that they have at their current jobs, and I just think it becomes a relationship, right? So you're not then becoming a manager for the current time. You're making a life commitment to be supporting them. And that's what has helped me, by the way. I mean, I believe also in becoming a manager, moving from one team to the other, that deep relationship often meant that many people wanted to come and work with me again. So I've
Yeah.
never found it hard to create a team.
Hmm. I think that's beautiful. And then you didn't find it hard to create a team, but how difficult was it to leave your team that you were with for like 14 years when you moved from Google to Facebook?
It was hard. It was hard, particularly because I couldn't tell people till very late. Uh, it was hard. In some ways, uh, I think my team also recognized, or many people that I was working with. I actually met a bunch very recently, and they were like, "You clearly look much happier than you were, right? So there's no doubt that you should have that." In fact, that's what we felt at that time too.
Hmm.
Uh, it's the same thing, right? It's like, when you as when when your parents are sad, when they're going through a hard time, right? You recognize when they need to do something different, right? So at some point in time, that relationship becomes something where it's not just you as a manager giving input, advice, whatever, to folks who work with you. You develop a relationship where they do the same,
Yeah.
right? So I knew that this wasn't like goodbye. Like, it's not like I would stop working or not be in touch. I have a WhatsApp group where so many of them are here, and in fact, many join WhatsApp just to be in that group, because many of them are, not, you know, daisies like us who have WhatsApp to use with their family. Many of them just use it to be a part of that group.
Yeah.
I was sad, but I think people were happy for me. That made it much easier. And I'm in touch with an extraordinary number of them.
Amazing.
They all have my phone number. They can call me. Many people call me at all times. So things haven't changed from that perspective.
Yeah, and I think they would have understood because obviously you were happier, right? Um, so yeah, we have lots and lots of questions and 18 minutes, so I'm gonna start going over them. The next question I would have asked would have been difference between Google and Facebook, but somebody has already asked that question. So let's start from that. So Afzal, asks what is the how is Google different from Facebook? And it was too early when we asked this question from you last time, but now you have spent like probably I think 6 or 8 months, 6 months probably at Facebook.
Nearly
So
6 months.
how are they different?
Uh, I think a lot of things are the same, but they are different. Different. I'll give an analogy. I think I talked about this last time, right? It's like you learn to drive in Bombay or Lahore,
Yeah.
and you are driving in New York, right? You expect that those have been circumstances which has prepared you to be a great driver, except when you go to New York, everything is inverted, right? You're driving on the other side of the road, your instincts don't work the same way, right?
Mm,
Even if you're driving the same car. So that's kind of how I felt. What I've observed to be different, and I've written a little bit about it, this on LinkedIn as well. Uh, I think there's a lot clearer differentiation between the manager role and the tech lead role, which
mm,
means that uh, there's a realignment for me personally because I used to do both of those, but really like this separation. That's one. Two, people move really fast. And they move really fast in part because they are much more accountable for what they do, right? Code gets checked in very quickly. Uh, Huge changes get discussed within a few engineers and get made immediately. And people take risk, but they also know that they're accountable for the downside, right?
mm,
So if they bring down the system, they have to go and clean it up, and they have to basically say, "Okay, sorry, it was wrong. Shouldn't have done something like this." So there's a lot more accountability and autonomy as a combination. The third thing is, I think they bring in people who are different in some ways to the basic. The criteria they look for is different than Google. They are looking for IQ plus EQ, and uh, Google primarily tends to look for IQ,
yeah.
right? So as a result, I remember at Google, I would meet somebody and I would be like, "Hey, great to meet you. Can we talk?" And they'd be like, "I'm busy for the next 2 weeks." Except what would happen is next week, next day, they'll go and look at who I am. Oh, that person. Okay, yeah, yeah, I'll come and talk, right? Whereas in Facebook, it's more like, "Hey, you're new, awesome. Let me welcome you. Why don't I set up some time?" And it hasn't mattered. They only figure out over time, right? So there's a desire to work with people and meet with people, which is generally what you see in sort of a high EQ environment, very
Mm,
social. And Google was much more like, I need to do my work, I need to get my code in, right? And so how do I let that be distraction free? So these are some of the differences. There are others that I've written about, but at a very high level, that's kind of what I've seen.
amazing. Awesome. So Shamin writes, what do you what do you think about the social media network growth in the next 5 years? And she's also talking about something that was announced in F8 conference, where it's going to be living room kind of a social media or a
Mm.
social network.
So I think what they announced, and I mean I might be wrong, is they basically have video conference meetings that are sort of like virtual reality. Like, five people are meeting and it's like their avatars show up in a room. As far as I remember, that's kind of what it was.
Yeah.
And it's sort of the next level of chat from many many years ago, right? So you're not just a handle, you're a person, there's a behavior. And I think it's actually becoming more and more likely with the pandemic and people basically not being in the same physical location. I think that thing is going to continue. The future of social media, it's I am not a very good visionary when it comes to products. I would imagine uh, my prediction is that Twitter will struggle because they have not found a good way to monetize what they're doing.
Mm,
And even though it's very powerful as a way to set up, it's unsustainable for them to do what they're doing, right? So that's one thing. So I
mm,
think the social media that is going to continue is going to be much more video oriented. TikTok, Reels, YouTube Shorts, because those are things that are much more natural for uh, influencing a lot of people while having a natural opportunity to both monetize and just create a sustainable framework, right? People
Mm.
still don't know how to tweet and live their lives,
Yeah.
right? You cannot pay your your roti kapda and makan with Twitter. As simple as that, right? But as a TikTok creator, you can. As a YouTube creator, you can.
Mm.
And I think as an Instagram creator, you can, right? So I think that's where I expect things are going to go, where video will become a primary mechanism. Uh, I I'm hoping that virtual reality will change the workplace uh,
Yeah.
how the workplace actually behaves, right? So a meeting with 20 people where none of them are in the same room, but with a feeling like we are in the same room, you're wearing a headset or whatnot. I just feel like that's going to fundamentally change how people interact with each other. Because over
Yeah.
VC things are, we've gotten used to it, but it's not really the same. Uh, and then, these glasses type of products which are appearing, augmented reality. I feel like that and social media's merger can be quite interesting too.
Yeah.
It's very hard to imagine, but it's sort of like, you turn your head and there's something in that building, and suddenly, rather than a tweet appearing on the internet somewhere, you see it like, hey, somebody in that building just said this, or you're able to sort of sit out and have a conversation with people that are really far, but you have a sense of, oh, this person is in that direction, this person in that direction.
Mm.
Engaging experiences in different ways.
Yeah. I think there's a really cool movie called Ready Player One. I don't know if you've seen it.
No, I haven't.
So they have like these VR glasses, and most of everybody's like not really living in the real world. They're living in this gamified version of the world, and they're interacting with each other through their avatars. They can talk to them, meet them, even shake hands with them because they're wearing these entire suits where they can feel each other. So it's a pretty cool, interesting movie.
I have missed it. 2018 movie. Okay, I'm gonna watch it. Thank you for the movie recommendation.
No problem. Awesome. And while we're at it, what do you think is the future now? Because COVID is here. Who knows how long it's gonna be. So what does work look like? What does remote work look like? Will Facebook ever, they say they're gonna go back in January, but they're gonna delay it, I'm assuming. But what are your thoughts? What do you think is gonna be the future now?
I think COVID is here for the next 10 years. That's unfortunately whatever I've seen, right? So I have seen uh, in front of my own eyes how long it took to eradicate polio.
Hmm.
I participated in that as a teenager, and for multiple years, you keep vaccinating people, even small infants, and then there is a still outbreak, right? So something like COVID, where a significant part of the population isn't even taking it seriously, even today, uh, I think it's going to continue for a long time, right? So what that means is there's a fundamental shift in how people behave in real life with each other. There's going to be, if I know you, if I trust you, I'm willing to meet with you, right? Otherwise, I kind of stay far. I'll meet from video conference and stuff like that, right? Because there's going to be that social contract is changing. What that
Hmm.
means for work is that a lot of meetings that were getting to know people first time in person are likely not going to be. Yeah, people are going to get to know each other a lot more at work and socially, whatnot, first remotely, and then meet up in person. That's kind of how I see it. For Facebook, we've and in most Silicon Valley in general, the realization is that there was a big fallacy that people needed to be, sort of in sneezing distance of each other, packed into small cubicles or whatnot. Whoa, I think people don't believe anymore. You don't need to be productive. You don't need to be that close to each other to be productive,
Hmm.
and that's been proven very well in the last 2 years. So I suspect that there'll be a lot more acceptance of going to the office 2 days a week.
Hmm.
That's what I'm going to do. The rest of the time I'll be on VC. I'll actually meet people socially. I'll meet people, in their backyards, invite them home, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
But I do believe that going to the office and being with other people is going to become a novelty, not the common thing. Uh, this will also likely mean that the traditional model of people need to be in a certain part of the world to work together will change. And
Yeah.
so I see the trend of what used to be called outsourcing, but now will just be global development teams much more,
Yeah.
because that barrier of working with somebody is gone, right? Like you're working, as you just said, from 12 to 8, right? You could be anywhere in the world if you're willing to work that time. I don't really care if, as if it's somebody working with me where they are. And so the sense of where you are
Hmm.
is gone. I actually know somebody who interestingly decided to be a nomad
Yeah.
and goes from country to country every 2 months and is both enjoying it. And then told me one of the side benefits, which was a surprise, is because they are not a resident of any country, they don't pay tax anywhere. I was like, "ये बहुत बढ़िया है." The new scam that you can. But they're enjoying life. They don't have the same material attachments. They don't have a house or whatnot. But that's another experiential way of living life and working very productively. So I feel like those things will start to happen much more freedom about where, except when you have kids, because kids still have to go to school. So if you have kids, sorry, you're out of luck. You have to stay somewhere because they have to go to school. But for everyone else, I feel like there's a lot more mobility. Even for education, right? I mean, people are not going to college the same way that they used to, only for fun, only for socialization, not to.
Yeah. So then, why are companies like Facebook and Google so reluctant to suddenly open up and start hiring without requiring H-1Bs and all these other visas? Because now they could essentially hire from anywhere in the world and not have to worry about things, right? But other startups, like younger startups, they don't care if you're from whichever country you're from. So, firstly, do you see this difference? And number two, if Facebook and Google are so innovative and moving so fast, why don't they adopt the same strategies?
Yeah, I mean, your observation is spot on. Some of these companies are more skeptical, uh, but I think this is changing. It's going to change. So these companies, they are like big ships. It takes some time to turn. The way
Hmm.
this is happening is, practically speaking, right? I'm sure that Facebook never had an office in Pakistan, neither did Google. But I'm pretty sure there's an employee from each of these companies today sitting in Pakistan and working. Right. So that's how that presence starts, right? Earlier it was, can I hire somebody in Spain?
Hmm.
No, they have to move. Today is like, but we have 50 people working there already. Oh, can they work completely remotely? Okay. So I feel that's how the conversation will start. It'll become on a case by case thing. Uh, Many larger companies still worry because they have to uh, then their constraints in terms of filing things change, their legal requirements change. They have to understand somebody who knows the local law, right? All of these things. That's probably why. But I think that's where that's going to happen.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. Awesome. So we have a couple of more minutes. So let's take Hamza Farouk's question. What is your personal definition of success?
Wow. My personal definition of success is, I guess, two things. One is knowing I made a contribution I'm proud of. And often that means working with people and seeing them do amazing things, right? So it's not just my own personal contribution, but something that I contributed to. And two, I think just making sure that I have taken care of everybody around me. My family needs are taken care of. In a
Hmm.
way, not having to worry about working for for compensation. That would be my definition. So the day I can get to that point is point of having complete freedom and having being able to take care of. It is not having opened a company and just changing, billions of people's lives. That I have very modest goals in comparison. But I want to get to a point where I don't have to worry about uh, my family's needs or needs of people around me or my own needs, and then have the freedom to do whatever. That is success is freedom, basically.
So what would you do if you suddenly today had the roti kapda and makan forever?
I would definitely spend more time with family. That's one. I would uh, spend time with friends who need my help particularly. Uh, I would spend a lot of time coaching and mentoring people. I would spend a lot of time uh, passing on whatever I've learned and being a part of those things. And many people that I've seen that have sort of extraordinarily successful second careers in their 50s, 60s have done exactly that.
Hmm.
Right? So they start helping out other people. People like, hey, you should really become a part of what we're doing, and then they become a part of what they're doing. So that's
Yeah.
kind of what I would hopefully look for.
Perfect. So yeah, I think we're like just about at on time, and I was saving the last question for that. What would be one advice that you would? So Talha Awan even asked this. So what would be the best advice that you would give to somebody starting off their career?
Uh, we think of careers as sprints and not as marathons. If you start your career in your 20s, chances are you have 50 years ahead of you of a job, of working. So it's a
Hmm.
lot longer than what people think. And so investing significantly in creating relationships very early in your career is much, much more important than people feel. Uh, Often people can never see more than 5 years ahead, and so they optimize for the short term.
Yeah.
People who do that often peak by the time they're 40, and then they start feeling like stuck. But if you've had an extraordinarily broad network of people, if you've created great relationships, the jobs that you start getting in your 40s come from people who know you,
Hmm.
right? So keeping every interaction that you have with your colleagues as uh, hey, if this person thinks of me 10 years from now, they would want to work with me again. If you can keep that mindset and know that you will work with them again at some point in time,
Hmm.
is a lot. Uh, I mean, that helps very early in the career. People in the beginning they feel very competitive, and they kind of want like, maybe here's a simpler way of thinking about this, right? Your career is like a rocket taking off. In the beginning, you move very slowly, you spend a lot of energy, and there's a lot of fire, right? You move very slowly, you're spending a lot of energy, and then the the higher you move, the easier movement becomes. But also, most career accidents occur in the early part of the career, right? Just like most rockets actually go kaboom close to launch, right? So don't make mistakes early on in your career. Get a smooth takeoff. Know that your effort to move fast will decrease over time,
Hmm.
and we're prepared to put that energy in the beginning.
I think that's an amazing analogy, and I think that should be a good end to this session. Thank you so much, Bhaskar. Always pleasure having you. So thank you so much for joining us again. And this time we'll have a bigger audience, so lots of more questions. But I think that's how much time we have. Thank you so much.
Thank
So yeah,
you.
I think that's about it. Hiba, I think we can end the stream. Thank you so much.